The moment Patricia Harlow yanked my driver's license out of my hand, I knew this was going to be one of those afternoons. She lifted it toward the sunlight like she was inspecting a diamond for flaws, squinting with the suspicion of someone checking for counterfeit bills at a corner store. "Nice try," she said, her voice dripping with superiority. "But you're not on our approved resident list. This ID could be fake for all I know." There I was, standing in my own driveway, arms loaded with grocery bags while my ice cream melted under the blistering July sun. Behind her stood two HOA volunteers, her loyal foot soldiers. One wore blinding orange Crocs with socks, and the other had on tactical cargo shorts, clearly convinced he was part of some elite suburban security force. "Ma'am," I said carefully, keeping my tone steady. "I moved in last week. Unit 47 on Sycamore Court. I've got all the paperwork inside if you'll just let me—" "Absolutely not," Patricia snapped, clutching my ID like she'd just won a trophy. "You'll vacate the premises immediately before I call the real authorities. We have strict protocols about unauthorized persons in Pine Valley Estates." I couldn't help but smile. The irony was too good to pass up because technically I was the real authorities. She just didn't know that Robert Mitchell, the man whose ID she was holding hostage, happened to be the director of the state HOA Oversight and Ethics Committee. My name's Robert Mitchell. I'm 55 years old, and after 3 decades working in civil engineering and regulatory enforcement, I've seen just about every type of petty power trip you can imagine. After my divorce last year, I decided it was time to downsize. My big house in the suburbs felt empty, so I went looking for something quieter, simpler, somewhere I could relax. That's how I ended up here at Pine Valley Estates. A neat tree-lined community of townhomes that looked peaceful on paper. The real estate agent painted it as a friendly, well-organized neighborhood. What they didn't mention was the self-appointed dictator running the place, Patricia Harlow, HOA president for 8 straight years, and the kind of woman who wielded her clipboard like a medieval weapon. Now, my background meant I wasn't new to bureaucracy. For years, I'd worked in zoning and infrastructure compliance before I accepted my current position as director of the state Homeowner Governance Integrity Board, a fancy title for the agency that keeps HOA boards from turning into mini-monarchies. My team investigates complaints, audits, finances, and, when necessary, dissolves entire HOA boards that abuse their power. Normally, that means a lot of paperwork, a few mediations, and maybe a field visit or two. I never thought I'd end up investigating my own neighborhood. Patricia made her presence known within 48 hours of my moving truck pulling away. It was a Tuesday morning when she showed up at my door, clipboard in hand, wearing a beige blazer that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager from 50 feet away. Mr. Mitchell," she said without so much as a hello. "I'm here about your lawn." I glanced down at my perfectly fine patch of grass. "What about it?" "The gradient," she said matter-of-factly. "It exceeds community standards. According to Section 4.3 of our landscaping guidelines, all lawns must maintain a slope between 2 and 4%. Yours appears to be at least 5.5. She handed me a glossy pamphlet titled "Slopes That Keep Us Safe," featuring a stock photo of a lawn so pristine it looked like a golf course fairway. "I'll look into it," I said, mostly to end the conversation. But that was only the beginning. Within a week, the violation notices started rolling in, each more absurd than the last. My trash bins weren't facing magnetic north. My curtains weren't seasonally appropriate. My Honda Accord was supposedly parked at a psychologically aggressive angle in my own driveway. I tried to be reasonable. I attended the next HOA meeting, introduced myself politely, and explained I was a new resident. Patricia stared me down like a security guard at a nightclub. "I have no record of your closing documents," she declared. "You'll need to provide proof of residency before you're allowed to speak at meetings." "I live here," I said, doing my best to stay calm. "I pay HOA dues." "Anyone can claim to pay dues," she replied with a dismissive wave. "Until you're verified in our system, you're considered a guest at best, a trespasser at worst." The situation escalated from irritating to outrageous when she blocked off my mailbox with orange cones, labeling it "Pending Residential Verification." For 3 days, I had to pick up my mail at the post office like some sort of Vagrant. Which brings us back to that blistering afternoon in my driveway, Patricia clutching my ID, while her sidekicks stood guard like they were protecting national secrets. "This is theft," I said, keeping my tone even. "You can't just take someone's identification." "It's not theft if it's for community security," she snapped, clearly proud of her logic. "Chad here is going to scan this through our verification system." Chad, the cargo shorts guy, pulled out what looked suspiciously like a grocery store barcode scanner and waved it near my license. After a few seconds of staring dramatically at the blank screen, he said, "No matches. Definitely unauthorized." I slowly set my grocery bags down, pulled out my phone, and started recording. "For the record, Patricia," I said, "you're confirming that you've confiscated my legal ID because your personal database doesn't recognize me as a resident?" Patricia puffed up like an angry peacock. "I'm confirming that you're trespassing and impersonating a resident. We've had issues with people sneaking into our pool." "I don't even swim," I muttered. "Exactly what a pool trespasser would say," she fired back triumphantly. At that point, I made a decision. I could have revealed my credentials right there, watched her crumble under the weight of her own arrogance. But where was the fun in that? No, Patricia had earned herself a proper official investigation. "Fine," I said, gathering my groceries. "Keep the ID. I'll be filing a complaint." Patricia actually laughed. "With who? The HOA complaint box? I empty that myself." "We'll see," I said, walking toward my door. "Don't get too comfortable," she shouted after me. "You have 72 hours to provide proof of residency or I'm calling the sheriff." Inside, I set down my melting groceries and went straight to my office. I opened my department's internal website and began documenting everything. Names, dates, statements, the works. The next morning, I filed an official ethics violation report under Article 19B of the State HOA Regulatory Code. Misappropriation of resident identification and abuse of authority. It was a serious charge, one that triggered an automatic investigation, but Patricia, blissfully unaware that she had just tangled with the wrong man, doubled down. The next day, I received a notice that my water would be temporarily suspended for non-compliance radiation emanating from the property, whatever that meant. She had Chad and his crock-wearing partner post "No trespassing" signs directly on my front lawn. And the final straw? Patricia organized a so-called community safety meeting dedicated entirely to discussing what she called the stranger situation in Unit 47. From my living room window, I watched as around 15 residents gathered in the common area. Patricia stood front and center, gesturing wildly toward my home like she was leading a neighborhood protest. It was surreal. My own neighbors whispering about me as if I were some dangerous intruder instead of a guy who just wanted to unpack his groceries in peace. 48 hours after I filed my complaint, things started moving fast. The state's automated review system had flagged Pine Valley Estates for an immediate audit because of the severity of Patricia's violations. That meant one thing: a mandatory compliance visit from the state oversight team. I'll never forget the look on Patricia's face when 3 investigators in navy blue polos, each bearing an official state badge, walked into the next HOA meeting. I made sure to arrive early, taking a seat quietly in the back. Just another concerned resident. "Good evening," said the lead investigator, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Diane Chen. "We're here in response to multiple violations of state HOA governance codes. This meeting is now under official review." Patricia's clipboard slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a smack. "There must be some mistake," she stammered. "We run a very tight ship here." "That's precisely the problem," Diane replied coolly, tapping her tablet. "We've received a formal complaint alleging identity theft, harassment, abuse of authority, and misuse of HOA powers." She paused just long enough to let the weight of those words sink in. "Patricia Harlow, are you aware that confiscating a legal ID is a federal offense?" "I was protecting the community," Patricia sputtered. "From a verified resident who provided multiple forms of documentation?" Diane's tone could have frozen lava. That was my cue. I stood up slowly. "Actually," I said, "I'd like my ID back now, Patricia." Every head in the room turned toward me. Patricia's face went from confused to shocked to horrified as Diane continued reading from her tablet. For the record, the complaint was filed by Robert Mitchell, director of the State HOA Oversight and Ethics Committee. She turned to me. Mr. Mitchell, would you like to address the board? I walked to the front of the room, savoring every step. Thank you, I said evenly. I moved to Pine Valley Estates looking for peace. Instead, I've been harassed, had my property blocked, my ID stolen, and been threatened with eviction from my own home. I've documented 17 separate violations of state regulations, all within 2 weeks. Patricia looked like she'd just swallowed a lemon wrapped in barbed wire. You're the director? She croaked. But you never said anything. I tried, I replied calmly. You wouldn't let me speak at meetings because, according to you, I wasn't verified in your system. What followed was one of the most thorough and brutal investigations I've ever witnessed. Over the next 3 days, the state team combed through every record Pine Valley had. And what they found? It was worse than anyone imagined. Patricia had been issuing fines for violations that didn't exist anywhere in the HOA bylaws. She'd actually created her own supplemental rule book with absurd entries like spiritual lawn maintenance and aura-based parking alignment. But it got uglier. Investigators uncovered a secret WhatsApp group called Enforcement Eagles, where Patricia and her inner circle mocked residents, posting pictures of their supposed infractions. One poor homeowner had been fined $300 for owning what Patricia called aggressively cheerful garden gnomes. Then came the financial audit, and that was the final nail. Patricia had used HOA funds to decorate her personal home office with motivational posters, install a private surveillance system that only monitored homes she didn't trust and pay for, leadership enhancement seminars that turned out to be, get this, a luxury cruise to the Bahamas. But the real smoking gun? The so-called resident verification database Chad pretended to scan my ID against. It didn't even exist. They'd been fabricating verification results on the spot to intimidate residents they considered troublesome. When the results were presented at the emergency HOA meeting, the community room was packed to capacity. People were standing in the back, whispering, waiting. I spotted the woman with the cheerful gnome sitting in the front row, nearly vibrating with vindication. Diane Chen stepped up to the podium, her expression hard as stone. After a comprehensive investigation, she began, we have found Pine Valley Estates HOA in violation of 37 separate state regulations. Effective immediately, the current board is dissolved pending restructuring. Patricia shot to her feet. You can't do this, she shouted. I've been running this HOA for 8 years. I've kept this community safe from chaos. You've been running it like your personal kingdom, Diane replied firmly. The state is placing Pine Valley under administrative probation. A temporary board will be appointed while new elections are organized. This is all his fault. Patricia pointed at me, her finger trembling. He tricked us. He should have disclosed who he was. I tried, I said mildly. You stole my ID, remember? Diane didn't even pause. Patricia Harlow, you are hereby permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in this state. You are facing fines totaling $47,000 for misuse of HOA funds and false representation of authority. Additionally, the identity theft charge has been referred to the district attorney's office. Patricia's knees buckled. She sank into her chair, gripping her clipboard like a life raft. $47,000, she whispered, plus potential criminal charges, Diane added. The district attorney will decide whether to pursue jail time. For ID theft, that could mean up to 3 years. Patricia's face drained of color. 3 years, she gasped. But I was just trying to maintain standards. The room erupted in laughter, bitter, cathartic laughter from residents who'd endured her tyranny for years. Someone even started a slow clap. Chad and his crock-wearing partner tried to slip out the back, but another state investigator intercepted them. They weren't getting away that easily. As Patricia sat there, trembling and defeated, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I'll lose my house, she whispered. My job at the bank, they'll fire me if I get a criminal record. For a brief second, I almost felt sympathy. Then I remembered my melted ice cream, the blocked mailbox, and 3 days of unnecessary trips to the post office. Maybe you should have thought of that, I said evenly, before you weaponized your clipboard. The final twist came moments later. Diane returned to the podium with a new announcement. Robert Mitchell, she said, has agreed to serve as temporary board president while Pine Valley's HOA is restructured. Patricia let out a strangled laugh that turned into a sob. Of course he has, she muttered bitterly. As the meeting ended, residents came up to shake my hand, sharing stories of their own run-ins with Patricia, everything from illegal fines to being threatened over holiday decorations. I stayed for a while, listening, reassuring, promising things would change. Meanwhile, Patricia stayed in her chair, staring blankly at the fine paperwork in her lap. The last thing I heard as I walked out the door was her whispering under her breath, but his lawn gradient really was 5.5%.